also have here Eloisa Carvalho, representing the Club Minerva, that I also support, joined with the team. And we were to have also Luciana Batista, who is the leader of the Women in Business Club for INSEAD Alumni Association. So these are the people that worked behind the scenes to make this webinar happen in Brazil for the Valentine's Day, because it's an important celebration for us as couples. And I think it's great to invite and have Jennifer, the professor from INSEAD for organizational behavior. She wrote a very interesting book, and she launched the book in October last year. And I've read the book, Jennifer. I liked it very much. So I think it really represents us. And I think it's going to be a great update and learnings for us in this lunch webinar, let's call, to talk about how working couples can thrive in career and relationship. I think we are very glad to have you here, Jennifer. Thank you very much. So I welcome you to join and tell us about your learnings with couples that work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is it over to me, or is anyone else saying anything?
You go on.
It's on you.
Okay, great. Well, happy Valentine's Day. It's amazing to have to do Valentine's Day in 1 year. I want this every year, so please invite me back next year. And tell my husband as well, so I actually get to Valentine's Day. So first of all, let me say, I hope you're all well and your families are well. I know it's a really challenging time for all of us, and I know Brazil in particular has been hit hard. So my thoughts are sort of with you and your families, and also your micro families, your couples, and for those of you who have children. It can be a very stressful time when we're in confinement. And so what I've done today is shape my presentation, which is taking the principles from my book and really applying to them to the predicament we're in now, which is that our worlds have compressed. And for most of us, most of our world is now taking place within a few square meters of our homes. Our partners are working in the same house as well. We're now colleagues as well as partners. And if we have children, we're also school teachers and everything else wrapped in. So I'm going to tailor the presentation this evening really to where we're facing now and what might happen in the next few months and years, and how that might impact us as working couples and working parents. So there's a Q&A thing. If you have any questions along the way, just type them in and I'll deal with them. And I'll also do an open Q&A at the end, but don't wait until the end. You can ask questions as we go along. So let me start off by trying to get my slides to move. So this is the book I wrote, and the book I wrote is very much around this real question of how can we combine a relationship that we want and a career we love. And I'm sure many of you have heard the idea that the most important career choice you make is who you marry. You know, Sheryl Sandberg has said it, Warren Buffett has said it, the Gateses have said it. But all of us who are in working couples know that it's not just a question of choosing Mr. or Mrs. Right. In fact, the problems often arise because we have found Mr. or Mrs. Right, someone we're in love with and we're committed to. But we're also committed to a career that we enjoy and is an important piece of who we are, our identity. And this is where the problems arise. And in the book, I really explore the challenges that dual love creates for us over the lifetime, and then identify various stages of our lives and careers where specific questions and challenges pop up, and what couples can do to address those and sort of move forward in a good way. But today I'm very much going to focus on wherever you are in that career journey, what's happening right now. And I'm going to start with a little personal story. So as many of you, I'm hoping some of my ex-students are on there. It's horrible, I can't see you all, but I'm hoping some of you are out there. But for those of you who know me, obviously you probably know my husband as well, Giampiero. He's Italian. And as you know from the COVID crisis, Italy was the first country to fall in Europe. So we were about 3 weeks behind in France. And as we started going into lockdown, my mother-in-law called me and she said, well, you know, Jennifer, two things are going to happen out of this. You're either going to get a divorce or you're going to have a third child. Well, you can imagine what an Italian mother-in-law is hoping for, and it's not the divorce. I had to kind of gently tell her I was a little bit too old for that. But what we see in this time, and what we see from the research, both coming out of China and also coming out of Italy now, and other, when we look at past forced confinements, is that they create an incredible amount of stress for couples. And there does tend to be a bifurcation. So if we look 9 months after one of these confinements, there's a spike in the divorce rate and there's a spike in the birth rate. And what I've been doing the last few months is trying to understand what is going on that splits couples into these two directions. Now, I'm hoping for a second honeymoon rather than a baby. It may not be a baby we're aiming for, but we do find that couples tend to diverge. Things either become really, really challenging, or the crisis kind of brings them together. And although not everything's perfect, they kind of pull through and they're stronger as a unit together. And I've become really interested in kind of what makes the difference between these two options. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that, a little bit psychologically, and then I'm going to get really practical towards the end and talk about what can you do in your couple tonight over a Valentine's Day romantic meal to make sure you go the baby route or the second honeymoon route, as opposed to the falling apart and the divorce route, because none of us want that. So I'm hoping you get to learn some of the insights from my book, and then it's going to be hopefully super practical in terms of what you can do next. And if you have any specific questions, you can ask for a friend if you like. Do put them in the book, do put them in the Q&A, and I'll try to answer them whatever they are. Okay, so the first thing I found is that the difference between whether you go the sort of divorce bad route or the closer together route is not about the practicalities. Now, I'm sure many of you are like me. As soon as I heard we were going into lockdown, my mind immediately went to, okay, how am I going to keep the schoolwork going for the kids? How are we going to split the days to work? How am I going to do my shopping to get all the food we need? All these practicality things. But it turns out that that is not really the issue for couples. Of course, these things are important, and they're very often top of mind because we need to get this stuff done. But these are not the things that really make the difference between whether we thrive as a couple or whether we struggle. And I very much found this in my book as well. I found in some ways these practicalities can be a red herring. We obsess about the childcare, who buys the milk, how to organize ourselves logistically. But that's not really what's happening. What's happening, of course, is something much more psychological underneath in our relationships. And I want to dig into that a little bit before I get to the practicalities, just so you understand this, so you can see where the advice is coming from. There's a few things going on here. If it's not about the practicalities, what is it? The first is that all couples I have found have a deal. Now, you may be thinking at this point, well, we don't have a deal. We've never talked about a deal. I'm sure many of you have not spoken about it, but I can guarantee you that all of you in your couples have a deal. You have a deal that concerns many things. Who plays different roles in the couple? For example, is one of you the kind of organizer of the couple? Is one of you the one who holds the emotions and makes sure everyone's feeling okay? Is one of you the person who keeps the spirits high? Is one of you the person who's maybe the more anxious person in the couple? We all have deals in our couples that split both psychological roles, practical roles, but also deals around, whose career is more important, who gets priority when it comes to work, travel, and things like this. Even if we haven't discussed it, you do have a deal in your couple. And what happens at times like this when we're confined is that deal becomes very apparent. So if you think back to 3-4 months ago when we were at work 8, 9, 10 hours a day, then we came home, we were meeting friends for dinner, we were seeing families on the weekend. If we had kids, we were running them around to their various sports practices in the week. It's very easy to sweep things under the carpet in our couple because, life's going on. And it's very easy to ignore the deal we have. But suddenly when everything is playing out in your small apartment, or even if you have a big house, it becomes very evident what the deal is. And of course, we can see the good things in the deal, but we can also see the pain points in the deal. It becomes very obvious where the problems are and where the imbalance is. And in particular, what we can see is who has the balance of power. Now, when I talk about power, I know power can be a dirty word, so let me explain what I mean. When I talk about power in a couple, I'm really talking about who gets supported to go after their aspirations. Now, let me back up a bit and explain this. So when I say aspirations, I mean broadly. So both work aspirations, my career goals. Am I supported to pursue my career goals? I also mean life aspirations. You know, many of us have things we're passionate about. It might be a hobby. I love playing my piano. It might be writing. It might be something on the side. It might be a community aspect. Maybe we're a very strong member of our church and being part of that community is really important. What often happens in couples is when we get together, we're excited by each other's aspirations, right? When we meet someone, often that spark is when we see them doing something they're passionate about and we think, oh, it's so cool that that person is really into X or is really wants to achieve Y in their career. And the power balance is quite equal because we're really trying to support each other to be our best selves. And then life takes over, right? We get busy, we have multiple responsibilities, maybe children come along, maybe our parents are aging and we need to look after them. And suddenly what happens is that power balance tips and the couple can become set up such that it supports one person's aspirations, whereas the other person becomes the supporting act. And it's really important to understand that this does not necessarily relate to who earns the most or who has the most powerful position. So I'll give you an example. And one couple I was talking to, which I talk about in my book, very successful couple, he's a CEO and she's an entrepreneur. And I was talking to him and he said, you know, the thing is, Jennifer, I feel like a failure. I said, you know, oh, that sounds strange. You know, you're a CEO, you earn a lot of money, high status, really interesting job. How do you explain that? And he said, well, this is just not what I wanted to be doing. I always wanted to go into public policy. Why didn't you? And he said, well, you know, each step, and it started early on, it just made sense for me to continue this path. So his wife is an entrepreneur in the arts. And so entrepreneurship, we know it's very up and down career, and especially in the arts, there's lots of projects and then time in between. And he said, and I really wanted to support her. She's excited about it. I was excited about it. So I took the stable corporate job and to, you know, allow her to have a more up and down career. And this made sense at first. It's what I wanted. You know, it made sense. I was enjoying it. But at every step, I doubled down on that decision. And so at every step, I was enabling her to live out her aspirations, but I was getting on this train that I couldn't get off. Now, this is to say, it's not just about who earns the money, but very often this happens in couples. One person will feel they can go for what they want, and the other person has to hold back. And this can become very evident at a time like this. And it's not just about who's picking up the housework and the childcare, the lion's share of it. It's also about who's given the space to reflect on what they want out of their careers at this time and have those conversations, and who is just having to head down, plow through, and sort of carry on. So this is one big question that comes up. And what can very often happen in this situation where we're confined together is this paradoxical thing where we're together all the time, but we can feel very, very lonely. And there's a sense that we're drifting apart from our partners. And many people have said to me, you know, I just feel we're on different planets. And of course, when this happens, it's natural that we interpret that there's something wrong with our couple, there's something wrong with our relationship, or maybe we didn't pick the right person, right? Maybe I didn't find Mr. or Mrs. Right. Maybe something else is going on here. And but what's really going on here is actually something quite different in crisis. So if we think about the defining feature of any crisis, it's anxiety. And I'm sure you, like me, like many of the people you know, are feeling more anxious right now. It's very normal. And there's a lot to feel anxious about, right? There's some real big things around the health of ourselves, our families, our loved ones. There's anxiety around the economic situation. You know, what will happen to my job? Could I be laid off? What's the economic prospect for my children graduating from college? You know, what about my investments and my pensions funds? I mean, there's a lot of anxieties around. And when we're feeling anxious, our brains don't like it. And they will do anything to stop us not feeling anxious. And one of the classic things our brain does is take on what psychologists call a defense mechanism. which is a fancy way of saying I do something to push the anxiety away. And one of these classic defense mechanisms is what psychologists will call splitting, which essentially means I will keep hold of the things I'm comfortable with, and I will push the other things onto someone else. So let me give you an example. And what happens in couples is then they polarize. So for example, in many couples right now, one person will have the kind of, okay, keep calm, carry on, we'll get through this. And the other person might be really anxious and talking about their anxieties all the time. One person might be the hypersocial person who's doing all those Zoom parties with the friends and families, and the other person really socially withdraws. So what we see is that this polarization in couples. And the difficulty here is it about you and your couple, or is it about the situation? And in a situation like we're in today, I would say a lot more of it is about the situation than you think. And so if this is happening in your couple, it's really important you think about this holistically and psychologically, rather than thinking there's something wrong with our pair, there's something very wrong with the situation, and it's becoming kind of played out in our pair. So given all of this, what can we do practically? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through some really practical steps of ways you can help yourselves in your couples. And if you're parents, I'm going to spend a bit of time on parenting as well. Get through these really stressful crisis situations and kind of hit the reset button on your couple. And even if your couple's doing pretty well, it's still worth doing these exercises. And what I'm going to do at the end is I'm going to send everyone some little worksheets. So tonight, I know this sounds horribly unromantic. You may want to do it tomorrow night. You can sit down with your partner and say, well, Jennifer said I need to do this. You can blame me and work through the worksheets with them. So you don't need to write anything down. And you're very quiet. And can I be really typical, especially for Brazilians? Like my Brazilian students are usually the chatty ones, and you're super quiet. So if you have any questions, type them in. You're making me feel very lonely. Okay. So what can we do about this situation? The first thing that's really important for us to do in our couple is to map out our worries, map out our concerns. Now, why do we want to do this? And it might sound a bit counterintuitive, because oftentimes in a time of crisis, we think, okay, I've just got to kind of keep calm, carry on, keep the ship sailing straight, especially when maybe there's kids in the family, or, you know, we're worried about elder relatives. We're the ones who have to keep stable. It's actually the worst thing we can do, because what happens in our brains with our anxiety is ignoring it doesn't make it go away, and it impacts our decision making. So when we're anxious, two things happen to our decision making. One is we make bad decisions because we're not fully analysing the, thank you, Beatrice, you're lovely. I've got a comment. Well, one of the things is we make bad decisions, right? Because we just want to escape the anxiety. So we're not analysing the situation correctly. And the second thing when we don't share our concerns is they just keep getting bigger. And we've all heard the analogy of the kind of bottle that explodes, right, when it builds up. And so there's something really helpful you can do in your couples here, which is to sit down and map out your concerns. And this essentially involves both of you sitting down and just brainstorming and writing. These are the top of mind things I'm worried about, and working through the list together. And you'll find there tends to be three types of concerns. One are imaginary concerns. Now, what do I mean by an imaginary concern? Very many of us, you know, our worst fears are always a lot worse than reality. And so I'll give you an example, not from COVID. I was talking to one of the older couples in my research, and he was really anxious about something. I said, you know, what's wrong? What's going on? And he said, well, I just know my wife wants us to move to be closer than the grandchildren. And he's like, it's just not what I want. I spent so many years parenting, and now I want us to have a break. I want us to go traveling. And I said, you know, if you talk to her about this, no, because if I raise it, you know, the delivery truck will be here the next day and we'll be packing our stuff. I was like, okay. And I spoke to his wife, and it was not even on her mind. It wasn't even on the radar. And he was working himself up into a frenzy about a concern that was just a fantasy. So one of the things that happens when we share our concerns is our partner can just say, that's just not going to happen. It's not anything that's on our radar. Great, it's off the list. The second thing is, I think someone's got their microphone on. The second thing is that happens when we share a concern is the classic thing, a problem shared is a problem halved. Often when we talk through them, we can think of a way between the two of us to manage them a bit. Even big concerns about economic concerns, we can start to look at financial management and things we can put in place to really help the situation. So mapping your concerns is the first point because it really clears the ground to make some rational decisions. And unless you do this first, what you do next in terms of decision making is likely to be biased because of those concerns you've not aired. So this is really important step. And I'm going to share a worksheet with you to work through this with your partner. The second piece that's very important is to think about what our new priorities are. Now, when I've talked to couples, many couples have said to me, we're just trying to carry on with like business as usual, both in business, but also in the home, right? Which means keep all the homework going and schoolwork for the kids, keep all the socializing up, even if it's on Zoom, you know, Zoom birthday parties. I don't know how many you've been to. I've been to way too many of those. All these things to keep carrying on. But if you step back and think about it, that doesn't make sense because business as usual from 3 months ago was based on a set of priorities that existed pre-COVID. And now for almost all of us, our priorities have dramatically shifted. I mean, if you just think about your work for a moment, I'm sure most of you, it's not just the fact that you're working from home, you're probably working on slightly different things. And some of you will be working on very different things. Some of you will have your workload really peaked. Others, it will have dropped off a cliff. Some of you will have changed the client portfolio. You'll be working in different ways. You'll be focusing on different areas. So our work priorities have shifted. I imagine your personal priorities have shifted as well. I think this is a time of introspection for many of us, like what is really important in the world, right? There's all these people dying, and that death awareness really gives us a sense of, you know, do we need to do all this stuff we're doing, or what is the important stuff and how can we focus on that? And what's really important is that our actions align with our priorities, align with our aspirations. So if you think about how do we measure our lives, it's very simple. We compare what we're doing to our values and our aspirations. And if they align, we feel happy. And if they don't, we feel unhappy and stressed out. And if we're in a couple and they don't align, we tend to feel unhappy and stressed out and blame it on our partner. You all do this. I know you may not want to admit it, but we all do it. And so what's happening right now is a lot of the reason we're feeling unhappy and stressed out is that misalignment is because we're comparing ourselves to our old priorities, but those have shifted. So it's really important we rethink, okay, what are our priorities right now, our goals, our aspirations, what are the things that matter to us? And think about how to structure our lives based on those, as opposed to the ones we had 3-4 months ago. So how do we do that? When I think of priorities, I think there's 4 really important areas. One is work, obviously, you know, all of us are INSEAD folks or folks from top engineering schools, you know, work is important to us. Work is important to us, and to understand what our work priorities are is really important. The second is relationships, right? Our children, the people around us who rely on us. Our relationships is the secondary. What are your priorities there? The third is health. Now, obviously with COVID, health is a real in-our-face priority. And we also are learning from COVID that the people who get the sickest are the people who are not very healthy to start with. They're probably a bit overweight, they maybe smoke, all these things. So health is really important. And the fourth one we very often overlook is play. What are your passions and what do you want to pursue? And so what's really important once you've mapped out your concerns is you sit down with your partner and you map out your priorities in these 4 areas, both of you, and look at how these fit together. And these essentially become your decision-making criteria. So if we think the concerns clear the ground and make sure you can make decisions in a rational way, And by setting these priorities, we're creating the parameters to structure our lives on top, right? It's essentially classic decision-making 101. We need some criteria before we start making decisions and structure our lives. And again, I've got a worksheet for you on this. And I just want to tackle Fernando's question, which is really interesting. And I don't know, now I'm going to ask you a question. I don't know how anyone can answer me, but can you see the Q&As that pop up, or am I the only one who can see them? I'm going to assume you can't see them, so I'm going to read it out. But maybe if you can see them, someone tell me. So Fernando's asking, I understand the power balance is a natural thing to happen in couples, but is it good? Can it change as years go by? And should we try to formalize these changes between the couple? Yes, it can definitely change. And of course, it's impossible to always keep it on a completely even keel. You know, it very often seesaws. And the ideal is for it to seesaw. The issue is when it gets stuck, because what happens over time is this person becomes resentful of always supporting this person, right? If it's tipped in this direction. So in terms of formalizing the changes, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by formalize, but I certainly think we should talk openly about this. I think many people, when they talk about couples, they say, oh, the key is communication. And I would say, kind of, but there's a lot of couples who talk all the time, but don't really say anything to each other. I think it's about communicating about the right stuff. And power is definitely one of those things it's worth communicating about. Now, it's not a good strategy to go to your partner and say, well, I think you have all the power in this couple. That's not going to go down very well. But how we get to power balance is in 2 steps. The first step is to really understand, what are my partner's aspirations and how can I support them? So most couples become unbalanced, not because their heart's not in the right place, not because they don't want to support each other, but because they don't really understand what it is they're supporting. They don't understand what's happening. So if I come back to this CEO entrepreneur couple, when I spoke to him, he said, you know, we just didn't realize it at the time. You know, we were so busy, we didn't stop to think that we were creating this kind of boiling frog syndrome. And I only realized when I was boiling in the water, right? And I was boiling with resentment, and I couldn't believe I'd got so far away from my aspirations. So I think the formalization is not to kind of try and devise a percentage, what percentage power do you have, what percentage power do I have? But really formalize and think about, and really try to deeply understand, what are your partner's aspirations and how can you explain yours to them? And given that, how can you best support each other? And if you can figure out that and keep revisiting that conversation, it's likely that you'll keep that power balance roughly on an even keel. Obviously, sometimes it will tip one way and sometimes the other. Is that okay? I'm presuming that's a yes. Okay. Thanks for the question, Fernando. So once you've done this groundwork of talking about your concerns and setting your priorities, the next really important thing is to think about boundaries. Now, this sounds a bit counterintuitive, but for those of you who've done those decision-making electives in your INSEAD MBA, you will know this, that more choice is worse for us. So the more choice we have, the harder it is to choose, and the more we regret our choices. So the classic research on this is, I love this research, it's on jam in supermarkets. So we've all been to the supermarket where they have those tasting stations. You know, you can taste and then you get a little voucher off to buy whatever the product is. And Sheeny Engar did this great research where she did it with jams, and she either had 3 pots of jam you could taste or 20. And what she found is if people tasted one of 3, they almost always bought jam. If you had a choice of 20, you almost never bought jam. And this has been repeated it's not just jam, it's been repeated in all sorts of walks of life. And the basic message is, more choice is not good for you, it's bad for you. And that's why boundaries are so important in couples, to limit our choice and contain the uncertainty. Let me take an obvious boundary, right? Geographic boundary. Where could you live in the world? If that was a totally open question and you hadn't drawn any boundaries, you know, what happens if your partner gets offered a job tomorrow in the Philippines or in Mongolia or in Italy? You know, all of these are on the table. But if you sat down and said, okay, it's just Brazil, or it's just Latin America, or I might consider Brazil and Portugal. You've already bound off many decisions and taken away that uncertainty of your couple. And that is, hang on, hi. Another half now, and that's my daughter. I obviously don't have a very strong boundary around when I'm doing a webinar, don't interrupt. I need to work on that one. And Rosa, I'll come to your question in a minute. Let me finish this boundary point. So having these boundaries is really important. And of course, they link to our aspirations, our priorities. If we understand what our priorities are, we can have a conversation around what are the boundaries we need in place in our couple to make that work. Now, right now, those boundaries probably concern your house, right? Which space is for work? Which space is for play? What times of the day do we work? What time do we finish? I usually finish by now, which is why she's knocking on the door. And these kind of boundaries. But more longer term, as we come out of COVID, it's really worth thinking about what are these boundaries for us. And the three classic boundaries are place, geography, right, or geography of your home, time. How much time at work is too much time that it will negatively impact your family and your partner's career, and so you need to bound off. And travel, right? How much work travel is too much travel? These three boundaries are really important in working couples. And Anna Rosa has a question here. When you say we need to map our concerns and priorities, are you saying this should be done individually or together? Both. So the ideal way to do it, and the worksheets I'm going to give you will be set up like this, is you both write out your thoughts individually, and then you have a conversation together to make them shared. And so what we see is that some things like boundaries clearly need to be agreed on together. They need to be shared, right? You cannot have one geographic boundary and your partner have another. That would be pretty odd. However, our aspirations and priorities are clearly going to be individual, but it's very important our partner understands them. So it's not enough for you to sit down and think, what are my priorities in these 4 areas? Because if your partner doesn't understand them, you're not going to get supported. So it's about doing it individually and together. So the drawing boundaries worksheet I'm going to send you will do exactly this. Like, think of it on your own, compare and agree a common set of boundaries. And all of these first 3 steps are essentially to set you up in a way that will make you make better decisions. I'm going to talk about what happens when a decision comes in a minute, but I want to do a little sidestep into parenting for a moment, because I imagine many of you are working parents, and this is a particularly stressful time for working parents because we have our kids in the house, we're also teachers, we're trying to keep everything going under one roof. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that and then come back. So if you're not a working parent, bear with us. Okay. So one of the biggest mistakes parents are making right now is to just try and keep everything going, right? So to keep all the homework going and the piano practice and the sports practice and as if we're in normal times. But if we think about this crisis, it is incredibly stressful for children. So unless you have a very small baby who won't be aware, your children's lives will have turned completely upside down. So they're not seeing their friends, their other caretakers, their teachers, their sports coaches, all these adults and children that form the fabric of their lives. And that is incredibly disorienting for children. And even children, my children are 10 and 12 now, so they're old enough to talk about these things. It's very hard, even at that age, for children to get their head around what does a pandemic mean, right? And what these death figures, how many people does that really, what does that really mean? Am I going to die? Are we all going to die? What if we get sick? These are really big questions to wrestle with. And so the way we parent our children right now has got to shift to respond to their emotional and practical needs. And it's very important as parents we take a step back before we think of all the things we need to do for our children. we take a step back and think, what are their needs right now? And their needs are likely to be very different from they were 3-4 months ago. And the needs, if we have multiple children like I do, their needs might be quite different between them. So our son is someone who's very structured, and the thing that he's missing most is a routine, right? He's really missing that sense of this is how the day progresses, which is not a need our daughter has. She has other kind of more emotional needs. It's really important we start from mapping out, what do my children need from me now, emotionally and practically, and then thinking about what are the things we really need to be focusing on. You know, do we really need them to keep up their musical instrument practice or their sports practice? Probably not, right? And just having the sense that we're in a different world and we need to respond to that. On a more happy note, we also need to think about that this time will be one of the most defining moments of our children's childhood. When they're our age, well, my age, in their mid-40s, they'll sit around the dinner table with their friends drinking wine and say, you know, where were you during COVID? What was your family doing? Where were you, you know, in lockdown? And I think it's worth reminding ourselves of that very often, that what are the memories we want to create from this time? Now, that's not to put pressure on you to say everything needs to be perfect. That's clearly not a real memory, right? There will be ups and downs, but is there a way we can create some special moments? Maybe do some, my kids have been doing some little video diaries and stuff, such that this becomes a time where memories are created that they can think of in future life and think of, what did it mean to be in our family? What did it mean to be in this situation with my brothers and sisters, with my parents, sort of going forward? So that's just a thought process for those of you who are parents. And again, I have a worksheet to think about what are the emotional and practical needs of our children, and how can we really respond to those mindfully, as opposed to just keep carrying on as we were before. Don't hesitate if you have any more questions. Hang on. Okay, so the last thing I really want to talk about before I open up for a big Q&A is support. So as I said before, very few couples fail because the partners aren't supportive of each other. They almost always fail because the partners think they're being supportive and really genuinely are trying to be, but are kind of pushing in the wrong direction. They're not understanding what their partner needs from them. And at a time like this, what's likely happened is the support you crave has probably shifted a little bit. So some of you may usually be really into emotional support, but now things are so crazy, you just need a practical hand with X, Y, Z, and that would be incredibly helpful for you. Others of you may have flipped in the other direction. It's really important with our couples that we sit down and talk through, what do we need from each other right now? And I think for many of us, we can feel shy about that. We can feel like, okay, we've just got to pull together and get through this the best that we can. Yes, you do. But it doesn't mean you can't ask each other for things. And these asks for support are really important, because if you think about it from an economic perspective, it means you can be efficient in your relationship, right? If I'm your partner and I know exactly what I need to do to support you, I can do that and not waste my time on any other things. And at the moment, our time is so precious and our stress levels are so high. If I know exactly what I can do to get the maximum relationship return, if I can put it that way, that's so helpful for me as a partner, right? So you're giving your partner a gift if you can communicate to them what you need from them. Now, this is not an invitation of like 100-point laundry list, but just the 2 or 3 things that would really help you during this time are a great thing to make clear to your partner, and to do this on an ongoing basis when we're out of COVID. And when I looked across my research, especially when I look at the points of career transition, I see there are 2 types of support that partners give each other. One is the kind of good old British tea and sympathy, right? Where we pump up our partner's self-esteem, we try and make them feel good about themselves. We try and take away their concerns. This feels great. Everyone loves this. And right now, we probably all need a bit of this. But what I found long-term was that that support was not actually very helpful in couples. The kind of support which really made the difference in working couples, particularly around juggling our career and our relationship, was support that I talk about in the book as a secure base support. And a secure base is this idea that we have that emotional cocoon, that nice loving tea and sympathy, but there's also a push away from the relationship. So let's imagine you go home tonight and you're talking to your partner and they're really not happy in their career and they're like, you know, I really got to make a move. Our tendency is to say, don't worry, you know, it'll probably get better. So let's calm down. Whereas the opposite thing might be to say, okay, what are you going to do about it, right? What's the next step? How are you going to get out there and explore? So it's rather than pulling our partner close and trying to give them a loving cuddle, it's a bit of a loving push to say, get out there, explore, experiment, and move on. And the couples who can do that really thrive over the long term. And yet it feels a little counterintuitive, because when we are feeling a bit anxious ourselves, our natural tendency is to pull our partners close, right? To hold on to them. Just like those of you have children, you know, when your children are anxious, they'll sort of hold on to your leg, right? But we also know when our children are feeling confident, they're on the other side of the playground, they're sort of away. And that's exactly what we're aiming for in our couple. When a couple are very secure, they're often not very tight together. They're often kind of moving in different directions to explore and then kind of coming back to that secure base. And that's the kind of support we're really aiming for in our couples that's going to kind of make you thrive over the lifetime. I'm very aware we've got 15 minutes left, and I promised to keep the last 15 minutes for questions and answers. So I'm happy to kind of take any questions you have on this topic, whether it's stuff we've talked about or stuff in general. I've also done a lot of research on how companies can support working couples. So if any of you have questions there, happy to field them. So I will be quiet now and wait for you to type. Yeah, Carl has got a great question. Why are women the ones who tend to feel guilty in the career versus parenting balance? It's a good question. This really comes back to gender stereotypes and norms. And actually, if you look at it, if we do research on the younger generation, and here I'm being generous with the word young, I'm sort of under 40s, what we actually see is there's quite a high propensity for men to feel guilty as well. It's just very socially unacceptable for them to talk about it. Whereas women are almost expected to express it. Like if you don't say, oh, I feel a bit bad for the work travel, people would think, oh, you must be a bad mother. So I think there's two things going on here. There's a lot of societal pressure on us to express that guilt and to sound like we're guilty. And there's also a lot of societal pressure on us that we have to be the ones looking after children. However, when you look at the data, Carla, what we see is there's simply no difference between the emotional development, the social development, and the intellectual development of children who are raised by working parents versus children who are raised by parents with one stay-at-home partner. There just is no difference. So all it is a personal choice. Do you want to stay at home with your kids, or do you want to, work and have that balance? It makes zero difference. And these studies have proven this across multiple countries. And these are what we call panel studies that study kids from birth right through to adulthood. And there just is no difference. So there's no rational reason for us to feel guilty. It's really the societal pressure that guilt is based on. Yeah, Beatrice, can you comment on maternity, paternity leave and what is the best practice for companies, same length? So I am a very strong believer that the best practice is to have parental leave as opposed to paternity and maternity leave. Now, what does that mean? It means all parents, regardless of their sex, get the same amount of leave. This is one of the only things I think that is really going to shift the inequality in society. And it's going to shift it for two reasons. One for the men and one for the women. So if we look in society, it's fairly acceptable now for women to have equal career ambitions to men. We don't kind of look down on women who are ambitious in their careers. We really look down on men, though, who are ambitious in their homes, who want to spend time with the children. And it's a very poisonous effect on men. So we see that even in companies who have a paternity leave, many men won't take it because they're afraid that they'll get passed over for promotion and kind of sidelined if they do. And there's a lot of evidence that they will. And so parental leave is one of the best ways to even out that playing field. And of course, for women, it will even out the playing field at home. If our partners are fully engaged in the home and kind of get what it takes to, manage the children and all the rest of it, that's going to even things out. So I think companies have a big role to play here. I'm just scrolling down things. Yeah, Laura, any tips for finding common ground while defining priorities and boundaries as a couple? So I think for priorities, you don't necessarily need common ground. You just need understanding. It's very rare for your priorities to exactly match your partner's, especially when we think of your work priorities, your play priorities, your passion priorities, and maybe your health priorities a little bit less. I mean, your relational priorities, hopefully, they kind of overlap. The boundaries, though, they really do need to overlap. And so I think what this takes, first of all, is mapping out and looking where are these big differences, and then both trying to take a step in towards the middle. So let's take, I don't know, travel for work, right? Let's say you could tolerate 20% travel and your partner thinks 30%. You're going to have to negotiate down to something like 20%. I mean, there's something about everyone giving a little bit of ground on boundaries, but you definitely don't need to have common ground on the priorities themselves. Yeah, so Luciana, any advice for companies hoping to better support working couples, parents specifically during COVID? Yes, a lot. And I've published a piece in Bloomberg, which maybe we'll post out later so that you can see on this. So there's some really concrete, practical things that companies can do to support couples, which don't actually cost much money. The first is to be flexible around the hours of the working day. So one of the main pain points for working couples and parents is that you somehow have to split the day with the childcare, right? Which means one of you might be working funny hours. So for example, I've been starting work very early in the morning, but then taking a big break in the afternoon to do homework and things like that with the kids. Many couples are doing this. And so one of the important things is to check in with the teams and say, okay, what realistically are the times of day you're working? And let's try and make sure we don't schedule team meetings that interact with that. Super practical, extremely appreciated by people, zero cost. Another thing you can do that can be really practical to support people is provide free resources. So right now, there are a lot of free resources out there, whether it's webinars. For example, I did a survival series for couples, a 10-part online course to help couples through the crisis. There's tons of them out there that many really good companies are pulling together a resource pack for their employees and just sending them out. Here are some resources if you're struggling with virtual work, making the most of Zoom meetings, how to balance, how to juggle. There's a lot of practical resources you can point people towards that, again, don't cost you anything, but it shows enormous goodwill on your part. And I think the third thing, which is really important, is that managers just simply ask and check in with people. It means the world to people and they really feel cared about if the organizations are reaching out, and whether that's with an employer survey or whether that's just the team meeting every week. How's everyone doing? What are the pain points? it means a lot to people that organizations do that. And again, it's completely free. And I think what's happening right now is we're really figuring out which companies are serious about their diversity and inclusion initiatives. So many companies right now talk a good game, but now is the time when they see, are they stepping up to support women, to support working couples, to support working parents, or were they just talking a good game? And employees will remember what happens in this period. Like, this is the period employees will remember. And I think some companies are going to get a nasty shock with turnover when things get back to usual, because people will remember if they've been badly treated and they will walk. So it's really important for companies to step up in this time and really support people the best they can. Okay, so Lucas said, are there any additional challenges or traps for couples that are working together? Yeah, it sounds really silly. The biggest trap is not having enough time apart. So, and this is important for a couple of reasons. One is stress, okay? If you're with each other all the time, you can create this vortex of stress. It's really important. Even those of you who are extreme extroverts, you need some alone time. So one of the biggest mistakes is couples are not scheduling time apart. Now, whether it's the walk around the block, whether it's, you know, you lock yourself in the bathroom for a long bath, whatever it is, it's really important we have time, structured time away from each other. That's true for stress. It's also true for desire. So if we think about our couples, we often desire our partner most when they're not with us, which sounds awful, but it's often when we're at a party and we see them across the room and we're like, oh, they're so good looking. You're like, And the problem now, when we're all hanging around in our pajamas the time, is that desire can drain out of relationships. That actually takes its toll after months. And so we really need to think about keeping that desire going in our relationships, and thinking about how we have the time apart and how we can still remain kind of a little bit of a mystery to each other, you know, to keep the relationship going over the long term. So I know it's Valentine's Day, you do need to spend tonight together, but maybe tomorrow night you can do something different. I'm just looking through the questions.
Jennifer,
yeah,
Carla here. As I have the power to unmute, I will ask my question here. Actually, as there is no new question, I will ask you too, so you can check if any new one come. Two questions then. How do you see, with your research, the success of couples with international career? Okay, so that both move internationally, and let's assume that they're not working for the same company. So how do they make it happen, as if they have this common objective of moving abroad with the whole family? This is my first question. And the second one is the cultural aspect. I mean, we are a Latin culture. We still rely yet on the power of balance that is unbalanced. And we also rely a lot on the outsourcing, okay? Yeah. So what can we learn? I think I learned, because we had the chance of living in Europe, that we have the sense of the work in a family, that this is valuable, that we bring the man within the family, also the homework, the family work, so that this is positive for the family development, that this shouldn't be only purely outsourced. So what can we learn as Brazilians from the European way of life within the family?
Yeah, so let me tackle the first one first. The first one, I could spend an hour on this. Let me say, there are some easy steps. Some international moves are easier than others. So what we find right now is there are some hubs that take a lot of expats. Let's say the shore of Lake Geneva, or Dubai, or Singapore. These kind of expat moves, where both of you move with different companies, are much easier than one of you having your company post you to, I don't know, rural Minnesota, right? And what's the other person going to do? And so I think this is where the boundaries come in. If you both desire an international career, it's really important you literally lay out a map of the world with your colored pens and think about where are the assignments that could feed you both, right? That you could both have career moves. And I think that's the most sensible thing. Now, that may cut out some of the opportunities your company offers that you're really interested in. But the only way you're going to make it work for both of you is to really think strategically about what are those hubs, you know, the Londons, the Dubais, the New Yorks, the Lake Genevas, the, you know, the Singapores, the Hong Kongs, these kind of places that are hub centers of big multinationals where a lot of companies are clustered, where you could realistically do that together. And I think having this hub model, a lot of couples can make it work. And what's really interesting in many of these hubs are organizations are banding together to form clubs to help dual career couples move in. So there's an organization called the International Dual Career Couples Network, which was actually set up by Nestle, and looks at these, it operates in these hubs and has a kind of recruitment consultancy for all the big companies in these hubs to try and help with dual career moves. So I think that's the easiest way. The second question, first of all, there's nothing wrong with outsourcing. Even European couples, plenty of outsourcing. So I think for me, it's about balance, right? Outsourcing is incredibly valuable for working couples and for working parents, particularly for those jobs we don't like, right? I have no desire to ever iron a shirt, right? Why would I waste my time on that kind of thing? However, there is a lot of joy to be had from doing some of these tasks as a family. I'll give you a personal example. Like, we love gardening, we grow our own vegetables, we kind of go nuts for it. Do we need to do that? Not really. But it teaches the kids about healthy eating, it teaches them about, you know, the environment, nature. It's a fun thing to do, it's a healthy thing to do. But I don't think there's any one solution. I'm not suggesting everyone grows an allotment in a garden, right? That might not be your thing. But I think it's worth thinking about in your family, what are the activities that can bind us together that maybe we could outsource, but that would become a part of the identity of our family, right? For us, it's kind of growing fruit and vegetables. It's just our thing, and we cook together, and like, this is a thing. But there's plenty of other stuff we outsource. For you and your families, it might be something else. But I always think of this as an identity perspective. What kind of family do you want to create? And therefore, what kind of joint tasks might you want to do together that create that kind of identity in that family? Even though you might, you know, I could just go to the store and buy the fruit and vegetables, but that's not the point. Like, we don't want to, we like doing it ourselves. Does that answer the question?
Sure, of course, it was very lightning. That's great. Thank you. By the way, let me take the chance, because I think we are ending our time. So to take the chance to say that it was amazing. Thank you very much. And to tell everyone that couldn't participate to read the book, because it completes what was missing today. I think it's very clarifying many aspects of challenge that we face.
Great.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Okay. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.